Hi, my name's Connor Ward. I'm an autistic speaker, consultant and vlogger, and let's talk about autistic representation. I've been lucky enough to be able to have a look, and not just have a look, at what I believe is the future of autistic representation, but really delve into it. The vast majority of this video is going to be talking about this incredible play called Perspective, but before we get to that, I just want to set a bit of history with autistic representation. I think the first thing that occurs to all of us when we have to think back into the past of autistic representation, we think of Rain Man, which doesn't really hold up today, I think we discovered. I even did like a reaction on the National Autistic Society's Facebook a couple of years ago. It certainly didn't do a lot of things right by today's standard, but that was a lot of people's first introduction to autistic people, and it really showcased the power of media in people's impressions of learning about autistic people. And over the years, there's been more and more autistic representation. I only really started paying attention to it though as soon as I received my diagnosis in 2016. The first autistic character that I saw as a late teen / early adult was Christopher Boone in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I attended the relaxed performance of that in July 2017. I was blown away. It's the first time that I'd seen something in any form of media that was really representative of a lot of me. Not loads of me, but a lot of me. And if you've been watching for a few years, then you'll realise that that Christopher was played by a neurotypical called Samuel J. Newton. I can't fault him for his portrayal in the time that it was. We'll get back to that. And 2017 really seemed to be the year where these representations kept popping up everywhere. We had things like Atypical pop up and The Good Doctor, both of which I wasn't particularly happy with the first season. Again, both the autistic main characters were portrayed by neurotypicals. Atypical definitely got lots of things wrong in that first season. And then we also saw something which was the first mainstream attempt at having an autistic character play an autistic character. To my knowledge, my friend Travis portrayed Mark on The A Word. He was playing an autistic character on a mainstream platform, and that did so much for us as a community. Of course, over the years, more and more have popped up in various mediums, and I've not watched all of them just because it really does, it takes it out of me to watch autistic portrayals a lot of the time. I have to spread it very thin. Otherwise, I just get too emotionally into it, and then I end up experiencing whatever meltdown is portrayed on screen normally. Then something happened this year, in 2021, that I think has changed autistic portrayal forever. And that's not talking about the brilliant play that I'm going to come up to. I don't want to spend too much on this because you know what it is and it's already creeping in, so we'll get rid of that. I enjoyed editing that, I imagine. I don't want to dwell on this because it's triggering for me to speak about, hence why I didn't even speak about it online. One thing that did come of 2020 was representation matters, and it's important to do it right. And I feel that was focused down, all of that energy from last year was focused into the autistic community with this project by Sia. And I don't think anybody can witness what happened with that and not say, yeah, we need autistic actors playing autistic characters. There have really been some good autistic performances by neurotypicals in the past, and I don't want to completely disregard that because, as I say, I've been lucky enough to have such a look at The Curious Incident and speak to Sam, like the interviews on my channel. He really did do it with empathy, and I know that there will be other actors that did the same. So whilst I think that is incredible, we're in a different age now. We're in an age where representation should be at the forefront of everything. Last year I also had the privilege of, just before the world turned upside down, having a look at an autistic representation which I still think about to this day, like in detail. Stages, a video game musical. We had Max Alexander Taylor portraying an autistic character. Him being autistic himself, it was just incredible to witness. But him being autistic, his character being autistic, wasn't the focus of the story. It was, like the entire show was about all different types of diversity and how they viewed a situation. And incredible, and I can't wait for that to be seen again in the future. And I think that is the way that we want to be seeing autistic characters in media. We also do want to be seeing the fact that someone's autistic at the centre of a story though. Because, believe it or not, outside our echo chamber, people still don't get it. Meaning that media and the arts really is a deep, powerful way to allow that to be understood by the general population. So let's move on now to the centre of this video, to the core of this video and why this video is happening. Perspective. Now this, for me, creeped out of nowhere. Like, normally I'm quite aware of what's going on in the autistic representation world. I keep an eye on as much as I can. But this one kind of leaped out of nowhere. I followed the main actor on Twitter and was like, right, I'm going to keep an eye on that and check that out at some point. Naturally, as with life, got distracted and didn't look into it. But then I was contacted by the National Theatre asking if I would like to review it. So, of course, I said yes. Which does mean that I've got to review it, in theory, but I suppose you get from the context of this video already 5 stars out of 5 stars. It's amazing. But why? Why is it the best, is the question. We have an autistic actor portraying an autistic character that is written by an autistic writer. And oh my god, it gets so many things right. You'll hear me mention this in the following footage, but it hadn't occurred to me that I'd not seen an autistic character swear, as in like an autistic teenager be an actual teenager and swear. That's the smallest example. That's just an easy one to quickly translate. It's authentic. You watch this and you see a 17-year-old autistic person. It can be so easy for depictions to infantilize autistic people. It doesn't happen here because it doesn't need to. And yes, in some places, of course, everyone is different. Of course. We are all individual people, we just so happen to be autistic. I'm going to keep this spoiler free because the vast majority of you haven't watched this play. After reviewing it, I was so lucky to get the opportunity to speak to JJ Green, who portrayed Leo, the main character, Audrey Sheffield, the director, and Mackenzie Wellfare, the writer. I could blab so much more, but let's just jump into the interview with JJ. There we go.
So, JJ, please may you start by giving a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Well, first of all, it's really nice to meet you. So I started in theatre by working in theme parks. I worked for Disneyland and I worked for Universal Studios, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. And that's how I kind of got my introduction into acting. But I've always really loved acting and always wanted to be a part of it. But I realised in doing those jobs and in doing other jobs that I've done that the access for autistic people just is not there, which ultimately kind of forces people to hide their access needs. And even in many cases to actually hide that they're autistic, period, because they're frightened that would that the sort of the society view of autism is going to stop them from getting employment, which I think there's a real fear there, but I think it's an accurate fear. I think that that's a real thing that people have the right to be afraid of because it can happen. So I really wanted to set about making this industry more accessible for people. So I've done a lot of work with equity, and it's been a pleasure to be an actor in Perspective by Mackenzie at the National Theatre. So that's kind of what I am and what I'm about. It's I've always been an actor, but I've more recently become an activist to try and gain access to theatre and film for autistic people, so that because I believe that we have a right to be here and to tell our own stories, and to create our own stories as well, not just on stage but off stage as well.
Well, I must admit, I'm still absolutely fascinated by Universal Studios in the Wizarding World. That's really cool. And I obviously well excited about what you've done with your work too. That's right up, as we were discussing just before this, it's right in the field of what I do. So as you mentioned there, Perspective, what was your initial impression when you heard about it, and how did you hear about it actually?
The National Theatre sent it to me. I'm going to start again in 3.
Yeah, go for it.
1. My introduction to the play was that the National Theatre sent it to me. The casting team sent it to me, and they basically just said, we have this play. It's written by an autistic playwright, which was, of course, my first draw to it, was that we haven't ever had that before. And if we have, it's been on a much smaller scale. So I knew that this was something that was fresh and something that I stood for. It was an authentic voice telling this story. And then I read it about 5 or 6 times during that day. And I just thought it was incredible because it was a story and a perspective on autism that we haven't yet heard. This whole episode takes place at the end of Leo's day. It's just a day in his life. There's nothing particularly significant about it, and yet there's everything significant about it. It's his thought processes, it's his emotions, it's his feelings, but it's also such a accurate lived experience of what one afternoon can and does feel like. And I just thought it was incredible that we got to see autism through a lens of an autistic person and an autistic writer, but also in a way that I felt didn't hide anything or try and portray autism in anything other than what it is. You had the joy in there, there was the anger in there, there was sadness, bitterness, openness, vulnerability, strength. There was all of those in such a small space that I just thought this would be such an incredible thing to be able to be a part of, because Leo is so real. So that was my intro.
And what an incredible intro to it. That was the thing that shocked me the most. It was the whole, wow, this is like 45 minutes or something, and all of that is packed into that. And it's certainly, it's the most, I think, like obviously any representation you do see in media, I can see like, I see bits of myself, and some of them I see a lot of myself. This one I'm like, okay, this one's kind of borderline close to me at 17 years old. So that's that was quite interesting.
Yeah. Which was beautifully captured by Mackenzie. Absolutely, like incredibly done. To be able to create this character that has got those lived experiences that I think are relatable to so many people in this community. And that afternoon, though not exactly the same as afternoons that some of us have been through, very close to.
Most definitely. So to go on to about you playing this role, as you said, you work in the advocacy side of stuff, which means that you have a pretty good idea of the history of all this stuff. So you're an autistic actor playing an autistic character, which is very few and far between historically. So how does that feel to be one of those few?
It feels huge. It feels huge. There was a lot of pressure from myself, not from anyone else, to kind of prove the point. So I worked really, really hard on it, but I was incredibly privileged and honored to be there. But also there was a side of me that was just like, thank goodness that we are here. Like this shouldn't be special, but it is. Does that make sense? That I am the first one, or one of the first ones, but I can't believe that I am. And it was a massive privilege, and I really hope that going forward it's a moment for change. I hope that plays like this continue to mount and films continue to mount until we get to a moment where everybody kind of universally agrees we can't go back to the way that it used to be. We can't go back to Rain Man. We can't do that anymore. It's I mean, even now in 2021, as I'm sure you know, we've got Atypical on Netflix, and we've got The Good Doctor, and all of these programs about us without us in it. So I really hope that we're starting to push. And even if we are just breaking that ice at the moment, the ice is cracking. And I think that there's something to be said about that. So it was a massive moment for me. I was very proud, and I felt really honored to be representing my community in a way that I don't think many of us have got to do before.
Yeah, and you do it so incredibly too. Like it's hard just to not fanboy over it, because I was watching it, I was like, oh, thank you. And I think you actually put it best yourself in the tweet that I saw earlier today of yours, which was especially after the SEA stuff that we had this year.
I can't lie. Of course, I think every autistic creative felt that whole episode incredibly deeply. Especially during a lockdown where we weren't even able to be doing creative stuff. So of course there was part of me that was like, I'm going to prove this lady wrong, and really prove that this side of the argument was the right side of the argument to be on, and that we can't carry on with this narrative. This cannot keep happening. And I really hope that Sia's film acts as a huge sort of monumental change. And I'm not grateful for that film in any way, but what I am grateful for is the conversations that came from it, and the fact that it really drew into the spotlight how important this is, because this, I think a lot of people, even outside of the autistic community, were repulsed by what was happening there. And going forward, we need to make sure that can't happen again. And it felt really, really good to kind of be up there and be like, she was wrong, wasn't she? So yeah,
it is incredible. So as you mentioned, like there's been a lot of bad portrayals out there. I like to. It's a strange thing to have to judge, but I've almost judged these past representations by their meltdown scenes, which I know sounds very interesting. And Leo gets pretty distressed in this show, which we can probably assume to be a meltdown. So what was it like to channel that such extreme emotion?
Well, it's hard, you know, and I think that I'd be lying if I said that that was an easy thing to be able to do. But the team that I had surrounding me, enabling me to do it, were incredible. The support that I received, the way that that whole rehearsal process that ended up being what you saw as the finished product was so friendly and accessible that we really were able to talk about things in a safe way. Nobody ever encouraged me to kind of relive my own traumas or my own experiences or anything like that. It was very much a conversation. That scene in particular, of course, it was difficult. It's really difficult because, you know, I had to mentally make sure that I wasn't going to go there as JJ. Like, Leo has to go there, but I can't go there on stage. And we had things in place that the team put in place for that, to make sure that that couldn't happen. I get overstimulated, and when I do, I find it difficult to breathe properly. So I had a mint in my mouth the entire time, that like nobody gets to see that stuff, but I have a sort of like, and it's the things like that that it's these little hacks that's what access is. It's avenues in that you can't see when you actually watch the performance, and no one can tell. So it was difficult, but what I will say is that the team surrounding me enabled me to have that authentic experience and portray it that way, safely and in a way that I felt comfortable. And one of the conversations that we had with Audrey, who is directing, which was one of my favorite conversations we had, was that initially we kind of discussed the idea that this is the first time that Leo has had an episode like this. And then I kind of spiraled onto that and brought to the table that I didn't think that it was. And I think this is maybe the 50th, 60th, 80th time that he's had an experience like this. And what makes it all the more harrowing is that he knows he's got hundreds more like this to come. This is just a Tuesday after school. You know, this is just a day for him. And that I think that in showing that that meltdown, the real rawness of it comes that he's done this before and he will do this again. And this is the way that his life is. So it was difficult, but again, it was a privilege to be able to do it. And it was done in a way that was so safe. And I had everyone making sure that I was okay. And I knew that I could advocate for myself and say, I'm not okay, I need a break. So yeah, so it was a real experience to go through, but I can't have imagined a safer environment to do it in.
I think that's one of the most fascinating answers I've ever had to any question ever. Like that, like, yeah, wow. I'm taking a moment to just kind of take all that in as such, because yeah, it's such a unique seems the weird word, but it's such a specific situation that has to be done with such delicacy on both sides. That I'm glad you had all the people around you to make sure that you were comfortable, and all of it pays off in the finished product, most definitely.
Thank you.
From my point of view, definitely.
But yeah, hard. I can't. I think that's the other side of this authentic casting that people need to understand is, of course, you know, you've got an autistic person who's being asked to have an autistic meltdown in a play. First things first about that is, of course, that I said yes. You know, as an actor, I consented to it, and that it was a safe environment, and these things can be achieved. But of course, it was more difficult for me than it would be for a neurotypical person. But the finished product was more authentic. And I did it safely. I would never push myself, and I know that no autistic actor would push themselves to a point that they are in danger themselves. And that's the beauty of access, is that it was made that way. It was made so that I was safe.
I love that. It's about building it up to be accommodating of everything in the first place, as opposed to taking an existing model and adapting it. That's certainly how I feel about all kind of accessibility as a whole. So with the meltdowns, obviously there was quite a lot to dig in, but of course we see many sides of Leo. So when you got around to preparing to it, how much of Leo's character traits / autistic traits aligned with your own, and how did you draw lines and stuff there?
I think quite a lot of them do. I think that his imagination is very similar to my own. His interest in fantasy worlds and books and music and escapism was something that I really, really related to. As was his frustration. I can't lie. I get that frustrated with things, and I really saw him as someone who has experienced similar things to me. There were obviously massive differences towards me and him and the way that we see the world. I would say that we're 50% kind of on the same wavelength, and then others weren't. But I really thought about who he was, and I used the Knights and Dragons sequence a lot in thinking about what his interests might be, what his hyperfixations might be, and filling in all those background bits that don't necessarily get said in the play, but who does he want to be when he's doing his Knights and Dragons, when his backpack comes down and he puts his tie on his head? Who is he emulating, and where is he escaping to? And these are the moments that he's most happy, and I believe that he's most happy in imagination and fantasy, which we see again in the stimming sequence with the painting and everything. And how does he feel about his own autism in relation to how does he feel the world thinks of him? Because what I found particularly fascinating about the play, which is something that I completely resonated with, was that I don't think Leo has a problem that he's autistic. I think Leo has a problem that everyone else has a problem that he's autistic. And I've really related to that. I was like, Leo's saying this openly. He's talking about this with Sean, and he's happily talking about it. And with Emma, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of issues there. It's the way that the world's viewing him. And that's what's making the self-loathing and other negative emotions towards it come up. It's not what he actually thinks. And that I certainly related to on a personal level. And I could bring elements of how that felt, and that inner conflict of, I'm happy with myself, but you're making me unhappy with myself.
Again, all of that just adds to making it such an authentic performance. It's kind of, it's off the scale in comparison to anything else I've ever seen. And I feel funny saying that when I know people who have portrayed like autistic characters in media, so I'm hoping that they don't watch this video, but yours was the best. But I find it really quite also fascinating to hear Leo swearing. I know that sounds really strange, but that's one thing that I didn't realize was absent until I heard Leo swearing.
Yeah,
I was like, but he's still 17. That's the point that I feel does get missed in a lot of these representations.
Yeah, he's still a 17-year-old boy. He still picked up all of these things from other people. He's still trying to communicate like everyone else. And of course, to a degree, everyone else's language is within his language. Of course, that's going to happen. I think that in a lot of portrayals of autism gets infantized quite a lot. To the point that, you know, we do not have, as far as I'm aware, any media where autistic people are sexually active or doing anything. Do you know what I mean? We're infantized quite. So it's like, well, they can't be swearing. You know, we can't put an autistic person swearing on screen, or God forbid having sex or being a love interest or doing anything adult. They've got to kind of be this pure innocent archetype that is just inaccurate of what this is as a demographic. So yeah, it is really interesting to see it. I think perspective that Mackenzie's written is an adult view of this. It's a teenager's view. It's the way that he would be, I think. What teenager doesn't swear? So why would an autistic teenager be any different? But you're right, it is absent. And I think there's a lot to be said about that, about how infantile the descriptions are of autism at the moment in media.
Well, perspective does so much in terms of pushing our representation into the future. So I wonder, where do you want autistic representation on stage and screen to be at in a few years' time?
I would really like it to be in a place where we know, not only do we do it and we always cast that way, we always cast authentically, but also where we all know that that's the best thing to happen, because there's a big difference between doing something because an industry's pressuring you or a community's pressuring you, and doing it because you believe that that is the right thing to do. I think that that's the point that we need to really tackle, is that we need to get people to understand and know that this is the authentic way to do it. I'm a huge believer that if you're getting an inauthentic portrayal of a character, you're getting an inauthentic education as an audience, and it's vital that we understand that feeds back into society. People, unfortunately, don't go to school as adults. We are not educated on these things in school. We use art, media, theatre, film as our way of learning in many ways. we see things and we take them as gospel, especially when they're things that we don't know a lot about. So for me, it's so important that we continue on this journey of authentic representation so that the communities of people in this country and the world get an authentic education, and then we can start to unpick the stigma towards autism that exists as a society. I believe that art, theatre, film is a huge vessel to be able to do that. It's an accessible vessel that everybody can watch a play, everybody can go see a film. So for me, in the future, I would love it if everybody who was casting an autistic part was casting an autistic actor in that role to showcase ability, to showcase variation, and also for these stories to start being told by writers who are autistic, by creatives, by lighting designers, by props managers. I want this community to feel that they have a place for their own involvement in stories that are relevant to their own community.
I can't put into words enough just how on the same page we are. Yeah, I think it's such an important area, and yeah, the arts is something I enjoy to consume. Therefore, I want to see it be representative of me and my peers.
Bigger than film, and I think if you go and people say, "Oh, it's just a film, it's just a play," I think that that's a very naive perspective. I think that we learn an awful lot from the art that we consume, and that cannot be underestimated. I think that there's an education there far greater than one gets in school. So,
wow, yeah. Oh, so many good things. And there's one thing I can't not have you mention whilst I've got you on camera. I'd really like if you could just speak about the other bits you've got going on outside of perspective, because there's something you created recently that I think is incredible. So yeah, I shall just leave you to it with that one.
Okay, yeah. So recently, well, over the last year, actually, I've worked a lot to gain as much research from autistic creatives as I possibly could within this industry. All of it voluntary on my own, kind of off my own steam, just to try and gain as many perspectives as possible, talk to people about what access needs they have, as long as they're comfortable to talk to me, and compile it all into a guide that used 3 pillars to sort of understand the industry and how we can make access more accessible and more present in our world. And those were that obviously we needed it to be authentic. It needed to be written. This guide needed to be written by an authentic voice. The research needed to be authentic, but it also needed to be written by someone who has an understanding of theatre and film and where the limitations and the difficulties lie. And finally, of course, talking to industry professionals and learning about what models are currently in place and where we can adapt upon them. Because I genuinely believe that people are not always intentionally ableist. It's just that they don't have the education and the things that they've put in place, that there's never been the opportunity for disabled people to question them. So I really wanted to learn about all those things. And then I wrote a huge guide, which I then sent to Equity, and we've now launched it through Equity. We are going to be doing an official release of it in the future. Obviously, at the moment, due to the coronavirus situation, we want to do an in-person launch. We felt it would be safer for a community that potentially are immunocompromised in places, that we don't do it right now and that we wait till a safer date. But the guide is now available online. You can download it.
In the description, it's a YouTube video.
Amazing, and accessible versions of that guide as well. At the moment, we've got downloadable PDF and Word documents, but we are having a BSL interpretation of that coming soon. So that's all steaming ahead, which is wonderful. We've got amazing support on that from the National Theatre, from Jill Green Casting, and through the CDG and the Stage and lots of other venues as well. So that's been amazing. And then I have written a play which is, to my knowledge, kind of unique in its take, that it's a semi-autobiographical play about what it's like to be both queer and autistic within the society that we live in, how that society impacts growing up. It's kind of like perspective, but elongated. Yeah, so it focuses a lot on ableism and about our views, but also I think the main central theme of the play that I wrote is that we're all sort of hiding something that's authentic about ourselves because we don't believe society will accept it, and we don't live in accepted society. So it looks a lot at gender, sexuality, disability, and the way that the world perceives those things, as well as using actual medical notes from my diagnosis as a child throughout the late 90s and the early 2000s, discusses more heavy topic matter such as ABA therapy and things that I was subjected to when I was younger, in a way that kind of highlights the issues that we still have in society, but does it in a way that's still uplifting and is still a positive story with a positive outcome, and includes fantasy and lots of different elements there. And sort of underlying message of it all, that we're all hiding something, but everyone's beautiful and unique, and we all just need to live in unison and access in a world together. And that's being produced by Katie Lipson of Aria Entertainments. We are hoping to go into production next year or late this year. And that's kind of as much as I can say about that right now. But I'm very, very excited. I'm really happy to be working with Katie and hopefully being directed by Brona Lagan as well. So I've seen their work, incredible work on Cruise with Jack Holden that they've just done. So I'm very excited about that going forward. And hopefully that's going to be another huge moment for autism representation coming up.
I'm so glad that that this play has not only allowed me to see such an incredible representation, but also allowed us to cross paths, because I'm fascinated by the work that you do, and I think it's fascinating. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming to have this conversation, because it makes I'm sure there's so many people that are going to benefit from just hearing your side of it, because it's a massive thing. It is, as you said, it shouldn't be a big thing, but it is a special thing. So I'm glad that I can almost celebrate that with you as such.
I really hope that there's so many people that follow it, join it. Like I want as many people kind of involved with this as possible. There are so many incredible autistic creative people that I want everyone to be getting their opportunities in. I really do.
Cool. Well, thank you so much again.
Look what that allows. If you have someone like JJ portraying an autistic character, you can get that from the interview without seeing the portrayal. There is an authenticity there which is unrivaled. You can see the amount of not just personal experience, but knowledge that he could channel into this role to create something that I can't compliment enough. When the conversation arises of should autistic actors portray autistic characters, one thing that often comes up is, but are autistic people actually capable? Just look at JJ. Please try tell me now in the comments that you still believe that is an argument. JJ's talents aside, he was lucky enough to be in a very enabling environment. And a person very involved in that process was the director, Audrey Sheffield. Not autistic herself, but I think the exact right kind of person to be tackling this kind of topic with such high levels of empathy that, I'm not going to talk too much. Let's just hand over to the interview. So, Audrey, please may you start by just introducing yourself.
Hi, yes, of course. So my name's Audrey Sheffield. I am a freelance theatre director. Mostly theatre, yes.
So have you had any experience in the past of working with autistic people or any other accessible needs?
I think knowingly, I think I've only ever worked in one environment where there were participants who self-identified as autistic, and that was in a project that I worked on for the Young Vic last year, called 2020, where they paired three directors with three different organisations in London that specialised in different areas, and the organisation that I was paired with was an organisation called Certitude, who support adults with learning disabilities, mental health support needs and autism. And so in that, I worked with participants to create a new play that then became a new film because of the pandemic. But within that, there were non-professional actors. So they were actually not actors at all, actually. They were just non-professionals, and they were participants. And so I was working with them. And within that group, there was a very large range of access needs. Some didn't have or some of them weren't autistic, some of them had mental health support, and everybody had different access needs. But that was I would say was my most recent and related experience, I'd say, so far. I have also worked in settings where there again have been different access needs, which have been a huge range. And again, within that, I think autism has fallen within it, and that was with young people as part of NT Connections Festival at the National Theatre, but otherwise, not specifically. It's a really long answer.
It sounds so fascinating. What were your first impressions when you came across Perspective?
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I hadn't read any other plays for New Views this year, so I was just sent it once it had been selected as the winning play. So that was exciting, not knowing anything about it at all. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was incredibly detailed and thorough. I thought there was a really clear, Mackenzie's voice came through really strongly, which is something that's always really exciting, and sometimes is something that I'm aware that one might want to refine more and more. Sometimes you really want to bring out the writer's voice as clearly and as authentically as possible. I feel like Mackenzie's voice really came through very, very clearly and strongly. It felt like a really distinctive style to the play. I love that it was excuse the dog. I love that it was incredibly theatrical. Like immediately it was really easy to kind of visualize it off the page, and it was very easy to kind of see the world of it. I loved the fact that it also created or raised challenges for me, or certain things that I didn't understand, or certain things that I was very aware that again I didn't have lived experience of, which was also an amazing challenge, and also a privilege and a responsibility, I guess I felt, that was really important for me to really fully understand, as one always has as a director, but like very specific to these circumstances, to really understand exactly what it was that Mackenzie wanted to express in every single moment of his play. So there was a lot of conversation around sort of making sure that we were on the same page.
I like it. Definitely shows through in the finished product of just how much, how much. I think respect is the word that I'm after. Respect for the actual material, but also for our autistic community. It there's nothing in there that I normally I will come away from even my favorite representations and be like, oh yeah, but there was this one. I'm literally like, no, it's perfect. So as you started to go into there, you were saying about about having an awareness. So what was there specifically that you did then to really kind of understand what it is, not just about autism, but about autistic people as such, and that kind of direction?
I think it might have been would have been probably a combination of a few things. So I guess it's first of all to say that sort of in the turnaround time was very quick. So we had the play, the next week we were in castings, and then I think it was definitely within 2 weeks. 2 weeks after that, we started rehearsals. So it was a very intense period of time, and sort of a short time to kind of jump in, right? Which was joyful. And I was like, right, we're going to embrace this like 120%, which we did. So I think on the one hand, it was really helpful just to reach out to people that I felt would be able to help and support me, guide me to different material that might be representative of the experience, or that might help me understand things in a more general sense, first of all, which was all really, really helpful. And it was also fascinating even doing that, hearing from people to say, do you know what, there's so little that feels authentic out there, and actually so little that feels representative, and potentially even more so, what sometimes came back was also actually feels sometimes damaging, or sometimes feels sort of I don't know if it's the right word, like harmfully unrepresentative of our community. And so that was interesting in itself. But then there were certain own story materials that I was guided to that I found really fascinating, really helpful. I also just found it absolutely invaluable was, on the one hand, the conversations that I was able to have with Mackenzie in the run up to rehearsals and through rehearsals as well at times. And so we were able to arrange a few Zoom calls where I could ask series of questions that had come up from me when I was reading the script, or when I was thinking about everything to do with the script in terms of design for the production, and just making sure that, and I guess this is something that I want to do always with any piece anyway, is what was incredibly useful is Mackenzie's written really detailed and very thorough specific stage directions pretty much throughout. So it's incredibly detailed in that respect. And even though sometimes we might not have completely stuck to all of them, they were always an incredibly helpful guide to know what Mackenzie wanted us to know. So that was really helpful, first of all. But then also I was able to then have conversations with Mackenzie to say, what is the feeling of this? Or to me, the impression of this is this. Am I understanding it in the way that you meant it to come across? And is that the feeling of it for you? And is that what you wanted it to read as or feel like for someone experiencing it? So those conversations were brilliant. Mackenzie was always really generous and open and just incredibly helpful through all of that. And then also having JJ and Evelyn involved as brilliant actors who are both autistic as well. So then they could also incredibly generously and invaluable to the process, were able to share a huge amount of their experience and insight, and so and really pass on a huge amount of information as well. So it felt like a real, well, I know, and not just for me, for everyone in the room, it felt like a real privilege to be able to learn and understand in the way that we could, and to have people sharing that experience with us felt, just incredible. So that was one of the main things that also was really, really invaluable.
Wow, it's just fascinating the extent that, like, the care and appreciation that will go into to getting it right. And I'm fascinated to hear about, but when I speak to Mackenzie about these stage directions, I find that really interesting. Because of course, not to go too into the stereotype, but as people can sometimes be very detailed. So I'm very intrigued by that. So you mentioned there about working with autistic people. Was there any noticeable difference, you as a director, on working with autistic actors?
Well, I guess, I was able to have a conversation, first of all, with JJ and with Evelyn beforehand, again on Zoom before we start rehearsals, just to find out from them, again, like, was there anything that would be helpful for me to know before going into rehearsals in terms of the way that we could support, whether it was different rehearsal hours or thinking about journeys in and avoiding rush hour on public transport, or anything really. And actually, for both of them, no, that was all okay. I think one thing that JJ requested was a note taker in tech. So we had somebody there to take notes in tech, which was brilliant and really seemed to be very helpful, which was great. And otherwise, JJ had said to me about giving direction or giving notes, and to make sure that I was super clear and direct with that. And any kind of uncertain, if I phrased anything in an uncertain way, as I can see that I definitely do quite often. So if it would be like, so maybe we could do it like this, then that's very helpful. And actually what I need to say is, okay, next time we're going to do it like this. And which was really brilliant to know. And also he would say, don't worry if you feel like you're being rude, or telling me what it is that we're going to be doing next. And hopefully it didn't come across like that anyway, but it's really good to know. But it was also really fascinating, because then I could also say to JJ, well, sometimes I genuinely am asking a question. It's not a leading question, so I am sometimes saying, what do you think about doing it like that? Or what do you think he's thinking in this moment? I don't have an answer in my head. I'm just, sometimes that's how I work. And so sometimes I'll want to ask that question so that we can find that out together. And sometimes it's fine that you don't know the answer, but sometimes I just want to ask the question. So whenever it was like that, then we decided that I would just be very clear and say, this is a genuine question I do really want to know the answer to. So that, again, there was no room for uncertainty or lack of clarity, and that would lead to sort of trying to understand what on earth it was that I wanted if I wasn't being clear.
It's really funny, isn't it? Because from, like, when you actually say those things out loud, it's like, well, why wouldn't anybody need clear direction as such, and
Yeah.
and
Yes,
be
I
open about all
know.
this stuff. So yeah, no,
I know.
but it's really nice, like, to hear the little details of even about just changing the language to be from
Yeah.
may to from
Yeah.
maybe to no,
Yes.
let's do it this way.
Yes, exactly. If
'Cause,
we're
yeah,
going to do that, absolutely.
all those things just make all the difference.
Absolutely. I mean, and the only other thing that was helpful was, and again, but I think this was what both Evelyn and JJ did brilliantly, was we just made it really clear that, like, if ever you need a break, or and so I would potentially check in a little more than I might have done, which again, I'll check in anyway, if you know what I mean. I'll always sort of hopefully, you'd think I wouldn't be like, oh, whatever, I'd always be kind of aware and just picking up on like how things are feeling or how it feels like people are doing. But I might ask more. I would have asked a little more frequently. But at the same time, I know that Evelyn and JJ both brilliantly would always say, actually, can I have 5 minutes? Just need to step outside. Or I just need a moment just to have a drink. Or, so those were things that we kind of worked out on the way that felt like they helped in particular moments, like if there was something particularly physical or something that felt a little bit triggering in any way. But it was just sort of establishing that open communication so that we would then be like, yes, of course, do, or let me know, or if you need a break, please say. And then there would be always that. And then similarly, sometimes, like, as it got closer to performance as well, so after tech, and maybe another day as well, I remember JJ just asking at the end of the day, could we start a bit later tomorrow morning, just so that I can, and it was more than to rest. I think I remember him saying it was just to process everything, because he was incredibly conscientious and made vast, I think he held a huge amount of information as we went at every moment. And I think it was just being aware that actually there was more processing time perhaps needed, and to be able to support him, we would start a bit later the next day, so that he could do what he needed to do to be able to let everything settle, which totally everyone has to process anyway, right?
Exactly.
But that was just really good to be aware of. And that was something that, again, he felt he could ask, which was brilliant. So then we could say, yes, of course, and work around that.
I think that's not just what an autistic person would want, an autistic actor would want out of a working relationship, but what every autistic person would like from the people that they work with. That just the empathy, I think, is just the fact that that, as you said, there's so much that you're thinking about, and a lot to make sure that experience is as inclusive as possible. And I'm sure that all of that factors into the end result of when you see this play, because it comes across as so wholesome, I think is the word that I can use to explain it. So all I can do is really just thank you for being one of the people that understand that there are different needs out there, and that's okay.
Of course, of course.
Because as I say, just to hear it makes all the difference, because it's something that historically we've not necessarily always had. So as I say again, it just all works into how this play is really setting quite a high bar going forward, and it's just fascinating to hear. I think the warmth of Audrey's attitude and care and consideration for projects like this would resonate even through that interview, and I can personally vouch for that. And I'm going to add this in. I wasn't originally, but I was really struggling during that interview because I had building works happening next door. I'd had an arrangement with the builders that they weren't going to make noise during that time because I need full concentration. And not only did they decide to use their most powerful tools, but of course they went against their word. So I had the battle of A, sound loud, B, I actually had to take a bit of a breather to try and sort everything out mid one of Audrey's answers, actually, and I can't express the patience and consideration as to why it was affecting me so much. So I've witnessed firsthand as to what attitude Audrey applied to this. So the last person we're going to speak to is Mackenzie Wellfare, and I purposely omitted this from the beginning of the video, but Mackenzie's 17, he's a student. The reason this is happening is because of an initiative by the National Theatre to allow young playwrights the opportunity to compete to get this kind of thing made. I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. But I wanted you to be able to submerge into perspective so much before finding out that the writer's 17. Because it just blows it all away so much more. such talent, and yeah, let's just get into that interview. Hello, Mackenzie. Please, may you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Wellfare, and I am the writer of Perspective.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for being here today. So, you Perspective came to be in such a unique way, I suppose. There was a competition, and you won that competition for the National Theatre. So when you heard about this whole competition to write a play, how quickly did you decide that it was an autistic experience that you wanted to share?
It wasn't my first idea, actually. I originally wanted to just create just a story, with my first idea being based on World War One.
Okay.
But I kind of realized I should write something that I'm passionate about and that I want to write about. So I started to think more along those lines, and I kind of ended up wanting to write about an autistic experience. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm very glad that you did come to that conclusion, and I'm sure you pretty are too. So the main character is Leo. Leo's a 17-year-old autistic guy. You are also. Are you still 17?
Yeah.
You're also a 17-year-old autistic guy. So when writing it, how much of yourself did you put into Leo?
I put quite a bit of myself into Leo. Not all of him is me. I wanted to kind of, I didn't want it just to be all about me. If anything, I wanted to write an experience that I had a connection with, but also that other people can relate to. So with the character, it is quite a bit like from me, but the experiences around him and the things he deals with aren't all what I've experienced in my life, but I know that a lot of people have.
Cool. And did you end up drawing on anything from, like, was there specifically in your mind, other autistic media hasn't done this, therefore I want to do this? Was there any of that going on?
Yeah, I'd always wanted, like, in my mind, like, if it won, I wanted a neurodivergent actor to play Leo Nemma. And because obviously things before, I don't think I've seen a film or TV series that's actually had an autistic person play an autistic character. So I've always wanted that, but I also wanted just kind of a raw and unfiltered version of it. And I didn't want to like sugarcoat it. I didn't want to like dramatize it, and I wanted to have it real and have it proper.
My favorite thing was, and I said this when I spoke to JJ, it didn't occur to me until I was seeing it, but I'd never seen an autistic character swear, and that blew my mind. That I was like, wait, why have we never seen this? Especially because off camera, I'm quite a potty mouth. I was like, it's got nothing to do with me being autistic, but it's a trait that, admittedly, with me, has probably just stuck around since I was 17. But like, if you're going to depict a 17-year-old, that's what a 17-year-old would be speaking like. So, yeah, I found that fascinating. So, how did it feel that once? Well, in fact, how long was the process of hearing about the competition to seeing it on screen?
We first heard about it in kind of like November time last year, but we only really started to write them in like January this year. So we started to come up with ideas, and we had a couple workshops, and then we started writing them, and it took about 3 months total because we submitted them in like late April time. So yeah, it was about that, and I was kind of going about with different ideas at the beginning, so it took me a little while to get started. But yeah, it took me about 2-3 months to write it, and yeah, obviously probably about 6 months total since I knew about it.
Wow, so quite a journey.
Yeah.
So obviously you put not only so much time, but you put so much mental, like, emotion, I think is the word that I'm going for. But you put so much into it. What was it like the first time you actually got to see it kind of realized as such?
it was unbelievable. I to have something that I put so much hard work into and just put my heart into come to life, it was a dream come true, pretty much. And yeah, it was. I had to keep trying to remind myself that it was real, that I was seeing it, because I had never imagined something like this was going to happen. But it has, so it's been unbelievable.
Wow. And as part of that, I'm sure there must have been a bit of you. Like as you said, I think I think you said you hadn't seen any autistic actors play autistic characters. There's been a few, but for you, if that was your first whack of it, what was that like to experience that specifically?
It was. I felt it was quite nice to see it happen, and to see like National be so supportive of it as well was really nice. And like as you said, I'm almost certain there are a few representations before that have had autistic actors play autistic characters, but kind of in the mainstream that I've seen with some like notable ones from the last few decades, it's typically kind of not like that. And so to have something like this happen and to be a part of it was an amazing feeling.
And I think it's important to acknowledge the fact of like, thank you for allowing that to happen, because of course, you know, like without you initially pushing it, there's the possibility it might not have happened. I'm someone who I've seen past performances of neurotypical people, and I've spoken to people who have played neurotypicals who have played autistic characters, and some do it with such empathy that I have so much respect for them. But I think now we are definitely in the age of representation, and yeah, I'm glad that this is one of the things to open it up, because as I've said, it sets such a high bar as to what that should be, and and it expresses it so authentically, and I could just fun over it for ages. And so I wonder, what would you like to see from autistic representation going forward from now?
Well, I want to see neurodivergent actors playing neurodivergent characters, definitely. I think, as you said, we're in that age now where we should be having that sort of representation, and it shouldn't be kind of taboo really to have that sort of happen. But also I just want to see more. I want to see more pieces like this where it's more real and raw and authentic, because people will then start to understand and hopefully appreciate and accept neurodivergence and how it affects people, and how like both the good and the bad side of it is. I just want more acceptance of it, and I feel like this will start to slowly get to that point from now.
I 100% think that perspective it's such a key part in doing that, and I really hope it will get seen by more people in the future. But for you personally, you're 17 years old and you've written this amazing thing. What have you personally got aspirational wise in terms of, well, you can go beyond autism, but where do you want to go with all this?
I want to keep writing plays now, because I've never had the confidence to write them before, and I've never finished a script before this. But I want to write more plays, and I definitely want to write more plays about autistic characters or just about autism in general. But I definitely will. I'll definitely obviously won't stick to it, but it definitely will be a priority of mine to try and have neurodivergent representation in theatre. So yeah.
Cool. And this must be not only having this play exist, but just the whole thing. It must be such a seal of approval almost, and such a push in the right direction of you can do this. And I can't say enough how grateful I am to have this exist in the world, because it came along at the right time, I think, and it just does such a perfect job. And I normally relate to a lot of autistic characters. I relate to a lot of them, but I also don't relate to a lot of their traits. This is the one which has just felt closest to 17-year-old me. I think I'd like to think in the last 6 years, I have become an adult a bit more. I watched this character and I was like, yeah, that is exactly. Had I seen that when I was 17, I didn't know I was autistic at 17. I hadn't had my diagnosis. I kind of suspected it, but I didn't really understand it. Had I seen that at 17, I think that would have just made such a difference for me. And particularly students get to watch this, don't they? And the student age includes 17-year-olds. And I hope there's many 17, 16, 15, 14-year-olds or whatever who will see this and get that feeling of warmth from it, because, yeah, you've put something out there which is just non-existent. So I can't thank you enough. So thank you very much for doing that. Not just for me, but for the community. As I say, I could just fan over it for ages, so I'm not going to put you in that position. I think you'll all join me in just, wow. I can't get over his talent. Still. And it's been about 10 days since I did the interview. So I need to kind of start rounding this all up. I think it's first of all shown that not only does having an autistic actor portray an autistic character pay off, that we should be getting more autistic writers to write autistic characters. And I think what the biggest one is, let's make more environments to allow autistic creatives to thrive. Like beyond the creative world, let's be honest, let's make more workspaces that allow autistic people to thrive. We have so many weird societal constructs that make no sense to the best of us. I think the example of what Audrey said, the whole, maybe we should try this. Like, why do we do that? And it's all the things like that. When you strip away all the weird societal ideologies that we have about what a person should be, and just make an environment that allows someone to thrive, look what they can deliver. A bar has been set here. We can't go back from this, especially after what happened earlier in the year. As a minimum, autistic characters should be portrayed by autistic actors. And quite simply, not just because of the Equality Act, but we should be bending over backwards to make an environment that works for these people, to allow them to give their all. Because the results are just so much more authentic. And that's what we want to see pay off at the end of the day. We want to see a more authentic performance, one that's more raw and comes across on screen or stage, to allow audience members to really connect and understand as to what these experiences of these characters are. And these characters represent people, and these people walk among them in the streets. We want a more empathetic world, and this is the way to do it. It's also really important that the National Theatre are praised in this, because they are such an established organisation, not just in our country, but in the world. And it's them doing things like that that really allow others to accept it. Because as soon as you have a big name doing something, it's so much easier to follow. It's like with Disney doing Loop. That's the story for another time, but I think that's incredible. But yeah, I'm very grateful for such an established organisation to be doing this. I definitely think there's still areas to reach from. For example, not everyone autistic is a white man. I want to explore, I want to see autistic mothers, autistic fathers, autistic professionals. I just want realisation that we can do stuff. The way I see it, in 10 years' time, I hope there's not one person in the autistic community that doesn't feel represented by at least something in the arts. I'm so lucky. Thank you so much again to JJ, to Audrey, to Mackenzie for allowing me to interview you, but also for the National Theatre for setting it all up. I'm blown away. I'm just blown away, and I wish you could all see perspective. But maybe you can. So I purposely left this bit to the end of the video because it will only be on the video for a certain amount of time, because then I'll chop it off, because you can do that on YouTube. So you can watch perspective. Only for a very short time though. You can go onto the National Theatre website to request access. And then this access expires on August the 6th. So please be quick. And then once you have watched it, go back and watch this video again, and you'll notice things that will just click into place a lot more. And then also it's important to mention that the competition that Mackenzie was a part of, the applications are open for that as well. So if you're a young writer that wants to write anything, never mind the next autistic portrayal, links are all in the description. Thank you so much for witnessing this. And whilst we're on a bit, which I'll chop off anyway, how would anybody feel about the next video I make being an overview of Atypical seasons 1 to 4? I'll leave you to it. Thanks, bye.